If you have a Bible and you like to read along, please turn in it to John, the 10th chapter. That's where we're going to spend our time today. In our Sunday school discussion, we touched on this just a little bit, and I want to look back at that for just a second. What we talked about was the fact that in the fallen world, everybody ultimately, even though we've reduced that in our own culture to some degree, has to work. They have to do something in order to earn their living, as the Bible says, by the sweat of one's brow. Now that doesn't mean obviously that everybody's out there with sweat pouring out of their face, but it does mean this, that most people are going to be engaged in some kind of occupation to sustain themselves wherein they'd rather be someplace else. And that's just how it is. That's why I would say that the prosperity gospel has such a great appeal, because it speaks to something very deep in us. Everybody would like to be fulfilled fully by what it is they do for a living. I think there's nothing wrong with that desire. But in the fallen world, I'm going to say it's mostly impossible. Those who look at their life and say they love what they do, I promise you, if you follow them around even for one day, you will find many instances of interaction where they don't love what they're doing in that moment, because there's something about it that's hard or stressful, or it creates some pain for them in some way in some other area of their life. I'd take a great athlete and say, what did they do to get there? Right? What did they give up in other areas of life in order to get to that spot? Something. Nothing is without a taint. So what I want to look at today in this text, and I love this text, it's one of my favorites to read and think of for myself. Where's the abundant life that Jesus is talking about here? What does it even mean? This fallen world, as I used to talk to a friend of mine, is a tragic world in some ways, because there are people who their natural predispositions, they're unable to really compete in this fallen world. Maybe they're artists, very sensitive. Maybe they're just unable to dig their heels in and compete in this fallen world. And you see a lot of people engaged in occupations just because that's what they fell into and they're able to survive. But they're not being who they were built to be. That is tragic. So let's take a look at this text and see what we could learn about this abundant life. I'll begin reading in John chapter 10, verse 1. Jesus says, I tell you the solemn truth. The one who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in some other way, is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. The doorkeeper keeps that door open for him, and the sheep hear the shepherd's voice. He calls his own sheep by name, and then he leads them out. When he has brought his sheep out, he goes out ahead of them. And the sheep follow the shepherd because they recognize the shepherd's voice. They will never follow a stranger, but will run away because they don't recognize the stranger's voice. Jesus told them this parable, but they did not understand him because they didn't know what he was saying to them. Jesus said again to them, I tell you the solemn truth, I am the door for the sheep. All who came before me were thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters through me, they will be saved, and they will come in and go out, and then they will find pasture. The thief comes to kill, steal, and destroy, but I have come that they might have life and have it abundantly. I'm the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays his life down for the sheep. The hired hand, who is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and the sheep are attacked, and he abandons the sheep and then runs away. So the wolf attacks the sheep and scatters them all, because that's a hired hand and is not concerned about the sheep, and the hired hand runs away. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and my own know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay my life down for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not from this sheepfold. I must bring them too, and they'll listen to my voice, so that there'll be one flock and one shepherd. That's why the Father loves me, because I lay my life down so that I might take it up again. So here we've got this beautiful pastoral picture. I love this picture. I mean, it warms my heart to read it. I don't know if you've ever noticed something about this text, but this is one of the texts that reveals the problem that the first 5 centuries of the church had in trying to describe who Jesus is. Because you've got incarnational elements in here that are confusing. In one instance, Jesus is the door. In another instance, Jesus is the shepherd who comes in and out of the door. Which one is he? Well, he's both, right? Who is the doorkeeper? That's God. So this is one of those texts where the people who in the first 5 centuries looked at it and they said, we don't know who Jesus really is. Because it seems like he fits all of these, and he does. That's the mystery of the incarnation. But this is a beautiful feel-good passage, is it not? I mean, who can read this as a believer and their heart's not warmed by it? This pastoral image of this person who loves us and is going to watch over us and take care of us just as though he were our shepherd and we are his sheep. That's the image, right? Now this text actually begins further back in John chapter 9. You find Jesus there heals a man born blind. The Pharisees are all upset. The Sadducees, the scribes, and Herodians. Why are they upset? Because Jesus does it on the Sabbath. They don't care about the guy. They don't care about the fact that here this child of Abraham can now see who has never seen in his life. No, we don't care about that. What we care about is Jesus and his tinkering with the law. That's what's important to us. Very different, isn't it, in the image of a shepherd? These people are the shepherds of the Jews. That's who they're supposed to be. And look at what they're concerned about. Jesus offends them, of course, and says, who's really blind here? Looks to me like you guys are. We love this passage because of the tenderness of it. It is so tender. Jesus, the shepherd, he knows you. He knows me. He knows us intimately. And we know his voice. Man, he's going to lead us to food and to provision. And he's going to take care of us. We love that picture. I love that picture. Now, there are people who don't believe who find this picture very offensive. I remember when I lived in Philadelphia, there was a radio commentator. I liked listening to the guy. He was Jewish. He was an atheist. He was a secular Jew. And he hated this idea. And he said, you don't want to be sheeple, do you? And I thought to myself, well, depends on who you're talking about. It's the shepherd here. Maybe if it's Washington, maybe I don't want to be a sheeple. But if you're talking about Jesus, I'm not so sure I don't like that idea pretty well. But I can tell you that non-believers hate this idea because it reduces our stance as human beings. And it's nothing but the rebellion of the human spirit toward God. That's all it is. Human rebellion. I'm not going to allow Jesus to be Lord. God is not going to be the ruler of everything. I am. That's the picture. I mean, it goes right back to the garden. What's going on there? We want to be the God of ourselves. Human rebellion. There's some history here that I think is important. And it changes the way we might look at this thing. First of all, sheep were not grazed where they were kept. You had to take the whole herd, and whether you hired a shepherd or you yourself owned the sheep and you were the shepherd, you had to take them out into the wilderness because this is a very arid part of the world. You don't have grass growing everywhere. You don't have lawns for sure. And so if the sheep are going to eat, you've got to take them somewhere to feed them. And you might have to take them, most of the time you did, to such a distance away that you're not coming home tonight. So you're going to stay with them. And what they would do, shepherds did this, and there were communal sheepfolds that they would build out in the wilderness. What were they? They stacked rocks up about waist high, which is about how high you can stack rocks without mortar. And they stacked them in these rings, and they left an opening. That's what Jesus talks about when he says the door to the sheepfold. And they would lead the sheep in there for overnight, and then the shepherd would sit down or sleep in the doorway. The sheep wouldn't come out because the shepherd's there. They stay in the sheepfold, And so Jesus is saying, look, if somebody wants to come and steal these animals, they're going to have to climb the wall, or they're going to have to get past the shepherd, right? The thief might come, but the sheep will not follow the thief. They just won't, because they don't recognize the thief's voice. Think about the shepherds who had thrown this man born blind out of the synagogue. What does that say about them as a shepherd? That's exactly what they'd done. You read the whole text of John 9. They threw him out of the synagogue. The leaders, the shepherds, and this is why Jesus was so offensive to them in this way. They had forgotten God in all of what they were doing. They no longer thought of themselves as servants, as shepherds. Jesus spoke of the leaders that way. Thus they were so offended by the way Jesus spoke. And he's not saying that all the prophets who came before Jesus were wrong either. He's not saying that. He's saying that the present leaders have forgotten everything that God charged them with to do and to be for the Jewish people. They weren't loving. As a matter of fact, if you go back and read some of the Jewish history, you find that the Jewish leadership spoke of the people as, and this was not a compliment, people of the land. The people of the land. That was not a compliment. That was like saying trash. Because they could not, the common person could not obey all of the law and live their life. It was impossible. I mean, what are you going to do if you've got children to take care of and it's the Sabbath? And you're not supposed to pick up anything heavier than a dried fig. Most children weigh more than that. Yeah. So if you've got to change a dirty hiney, you're going to be picking up something that weighs a whole lot more than a dried fig, and you're going to thus break the law. The Pharisees, Sadducees, scribes, and Herodians knew that, and they held it over the people's heads. That's why it bothered Jesus so much. The people, the leaders, were the ones who were blind. They didn't understand the spirit of the law at all. And the man born blind is a prime example of their so-called leadership, their shepherding of the people. That's why Jesus goes into this text we just read right after the episode with the man born blind. It's not an accident. The Pharisees cared more for the use of the Sabbath than they did for the fact that a child of Abraham had been healed. Remember when Jesus raised Lazarus? He's a Jew. Jesus calls him forth from the tomb 4 days dead. And what do? They gather together to figure out some way to kill Jesus. Wow. I mean, what kind of mindset is that? And you're the shepherds. Oh, Jesus was so hard on them because, rightly so, they were the shepherds of the Jewish people, and look at the way they're shepherding them. But you see, the shepherding idea that Jesus gives us here is one that touches, I would say, one of the deepest of all human needs. There's a lot of psychology around this, and I want to funnel this down into the present day. There are 3 features of living that human beings have as needs within our lives. And this is not me. I didn't make this up. This is common knowledge among those who study the human condition in order to be therapeutic to the human condition. So let's take a look for just a minute and see those 3 needs and see how it is the Good Shepherd answers those 3 needs for you and for me. The first one is anonymity. Nobody wants to be anonymous. Now, there are people who will come into a crowded room and they don't want to be seen. I understand that. I feel that way. As a matter of fact, yesterday when I came to the celebration dinner, I sat at a table by myself because I just didn't want to. I wanted to reflect on the day. I wasn't interested in having a yuck conversation with somebody that didn't mean anything, which is most of the conversations. How you doing, man? I'm doing good. How about you? You know, how'd your day go? My day went good. I mean, I just wasn't interested in that because I was really reflecting on what had happened that day, and I wanted to just be alone and look at the slides, the imagery of all the people and what they had done that day, and just think about it. Think about what the Lord was saying to me through that. People need to know they cannot be anonymous fully. They need to know that they are valuable to somebody and that the gifts they've been given are useful in some way. No matter the income level, people need to know that. We all need to know that. Then we can't be irrelevant. That's the second thing that we just cannot be. People need to know that what we do and who we are matters to somebody in some concrete way. No matter what the job is, no matter what the income level, no matter what the occupational work that's involved, it has to matter to somebody. Somebody has to care about what we do. Or otherwise we say, well, I guess if you're Al Capone, you could get away with that. I don't know. But then there's got to be, the third thing is some kind of measurable progress. Am I going somewhere with life? People need to see some kind of standard. Now, if you go back in your own lives, our own lives in time, to say a workplace environment, whether it be an office or a blue-collar kind of situation, if there is no measurable standard, guess what it devolves into? Workplace politics. That's what it devolves into. In other words, I've got to make myself visible to somebody above me who will move me forward. And that's all it means. And it takes away the fact of anything being worth something, because now my movement forward is in the hands of other people. It's not in my own hands to do a good job. Do the best job you want, and somebody else gets promoted, and you think, oh, how did that happen? Well, they right place, right time, and they knew people, right? So there has to be measurable progress. There's got to be some standard there that says, I am going forward. Otherwise, life just becomes very frustrating. It's relevant in our employment picture because, and what we do, because that's where we spend the bulk of our waking hours, is it not? I will never forget. This was an uncle that I loved deeply. And I remember being 16, 14, somewhere in that range, years old, and him coming to me and talking to me about, you know how older folks are when you're 16, 17, what you going to do for a living? I don't know. What do you want to be when you grow up? I'm still working on that. So he would ask me that question, and then he said, you know, Rip, and I would give anything, well, maybe not. I would love to be able to go back to that day and then install what he asked me into my thinking so that life would have been a lot different. He said, you should work to find something that you can do that you like so that you spend the bulk of your waking hours doing that. Oh boy, should I have listened to my uncle. My mother was right, my uncle's right, my teachers were right, and I was wrong. And I did not pay attention to that. It seems like, as we look at all these things, that a lot of the child is still in us. A lot of the child is still in us. We need the approval. Look, Mommy. Look, Daddy, look at what I can do. We need that. It's not a bad thing. I'm going to say it comes right from the garden. What were we there in the garden to do? We were there in the garden to live before God. And the only thing we had to do was be who He created us to be. Think of that. Think of that. What would that be like if you and I could spend our waking hours just being who we were made to be without any impediments? That's the way it was supposed to be, and I think we remember that deep down. Look, Mommy, look, Daddy, look at what I can do. The Pharisees, they don't care about this guy at all. They don't even know his name. Their only concern is that a law had been broken by Jesus. You know how the Pharisees got ahead? Sadducees, the scribes, and the Herodians? By being real pharisaical. That's how they got ahead. The harsher they were toward the law, the better Pharisees, Sadducees, scribes, and Herodians they were. They got ahead by office politics. I'm going to do these. It's kind of like what we see today, is it not? Like what we call it virtue signaling. Some corporation the head of the corporation is going to say something that's real woke in order to be seen to help the corporation get ahead with everybody else who wants to see that corporation look really woke. It makes us feel better about ourselves. Jesus provides a contrast here, though. Think about it this way. He takes all the brokenness and all the emptiness that this fallen world has instilled in us over all these centuries, and he answers them. For instance, let's think of the three. Nobody's anonymous for Jesus. Look at the text we just read. The shepherd knows the sheep, and the sheep know the shepherd's voice. We're none of us anonymous with Jesus. He knows us. He knows us and loves us so much. What does it say? And the shepherd lays his life down for the sheep. Wow. That's somebody I can get behind. We're not irrelevant either. We're not irrelevant. You know, this is a bothersome thing to me. I think this is where we, maybe not all of us, maybe none of you, I don't know, where we think about the Bible wrongly relative to gifts. We look at gifts and we say, ooh, that gift, that's the one that looks like the one I'd want to have because so-and-so has that gift and I want to be like so-and-so and we're right back to office politics all over again. No. Let me just say this, and I believe this with all my might because it's biblical. Paul says, no, not all our hands, not all our feet, not all our eyes, not all our ears. We are none of us irrelevant because every human being, whether believer or not, has been given gifts. Every human being. And we all have the most important gift that can possibly be brought. You know what that is? The only one that you and I can bring. You're the only one that can bring the gifts God's given you in the way that you bring them. Nobody else can do that. People think, gosh, I don't think I have any gifts. Well, you're wrong. And the most important gift that God has given to anybody is the one he's given to you and to me, because we're the only ones who can bring it in that way. That is why it is so terrible when we sin, because it diminishes the usefulness of the gifts God has given to us. So we're not irrelevant. He's built us for something, all of us. And then finally, there's a standard of measurement that I can look at. I've got Jesus in front of me. I know where I'm headed. That's where I want to go. I want to be like that. I don't have to do any office politics. I've got an audience of one who sees everything. And so every success that I have or you have in terms of living for the Lord is seen. I don't have to make some kind of show about it. And if none of you see it or I don't see it in you, doesn't mean a thing. God has seen it. And the measurement standard is absolute. Never changes. I have a friend. Think for a minute. What would it mean in the world if every person in a position of some kind of authority over other human beings, I don't care what it is, saw their job as the job being, the description being, I'm here to facilitate those people flourishing as human beings? Boy, if we elected Congress people like that, things would look a lot different than they do right now, wouldn't they? I have a friend who works in a very large corporation, and he is in management. He's up there. Big paycheck, big authority, big title. You know how he sees his job? He sees his job as being that which facilitates those under him to make the most of their lives in the positions they have and to move forward. That's how he sees his life's work. Man, if everybody saw things like that, wouldn't it be wonderful? Jesus used specific language here. I don't know if you're aware of that or not, when he talks about abundant life. What is abundant life? That's the question, really. I want to funnel all this down to that. What is abundant life? Well, the New Testament uses two specific words for life. The first one is bios. That's the carcass. Bios is the carcass. It's the word from which we get our word biology. Bios. Beta, iota, omicron, sigma. Bios. The carcass. That's not the word Jesus uses here. He doesn't use bios. He uses another word. The word is zoe. It's the word from which we get the woman's name Zoe. Did you know that? It's a different kind of life. It's the life that can only be had by God's instilling it. It's the life that God has. God's life is Zoe. God doesn't have a body, yet he's alive. The closer we are to God, and the more that closeness to God produces service to other people, the more Zoe we are. That's the abundant life that Jesus is speaking of here. He's not speaking of boats and planes and automobiles and houses. He's speaking of Zoe, the inner life. Lewis said this, and I love this saying. I wish I'd made it up. We do not have a right to happiness anymore. It doesn't exist any more than we have a right to be athletic, or to be good looking, or to be tall, or to have good weather at our picnics. We don't. What we do have a right to is what God has promised us. That if we would allow him to be the shepherd, we would have abundant life. We would have Zoe, and we would have it to the full. Jesus was speaking about the only kind of life that God gives. And you know what's beautiful about that life? No matter what circumstance we find ourselves in, it cannot be stripped away. It can't be stripped away. That's the kind of life that the shepherd wants for his sheep. You and me. And the only avenue to it is to ask God for it. I don't know where everybody is today, but if I've said anything about which you've got a question, you want to pray with me, I'll stay here as long as it takes as we close.